Poetry Center, bringing poetry to Paterson since 1980 at Passaic County Community College.
And I'm so glad to have you here. And as John said, as some of you may remember, I'm Susan Amsterdam, the project director for this wonderful grant from the National Endowment for the Arts. We are so grateful to have it. And some of you are experienced poets, have been writing for years. Others, like me, I sat in on some of the workshops myself, who are not poets, maybe like me, an experienced writer, but certainly I never wrote poetry. But none of this would happen without the executive director of the Poetry Center here at Passaic County Community College, Maria Mazziotti-Gillen.
I'm very pleased to welcome you all here today. We certainly were very grateful to get this National Endowment for the Arts grant. It's a very prestigious thing to have gotten, and it was wonderful to see it in Poets and Writers along with these major organizations in the country. And I went to a meeting at the Associated Writing Programs Conference, and it was invited because we got this grant. And I look around and I see that here are these people from these gigantic organizations like the Academy of American Poets and Poets and Writers, and really very large, very well-funded organizations, and there we are. So it was really very exciting. I have to say that the program wouldn't have been possible without Susan Amsterdam and her coordination of it and directing of it. It became much more complicated to administer than we originally thought when we wrote the grant, and we certainly are very pleased by the response of the participants. Today we're having obviously a reading for Bridges, and I love poetry about mature adults of northern New Jersey. Such a euphemism for us, mature adults. And that's what we are, mature adults. And our perspectives are just a little bit different from the perspectives of 17 or 18 or 20-year-olds. And I think that's one of the things that makes this book so interesting, and I think will make this reading so interesting. So I'm going to bring Susan Amsterdam back to the podium to introduce the readers today.
Thank you, Maria. As some of you, I don't remember in which workshops I had mentioned that the grant was really for senior citizens, but I just didn't like that term. So we came up with mature adults. I didn't think of it as a euphemism. I thought it was less of a euphemism, actually. But at any rate, what we're going to do is read these in alphabetic order by author, and that's how the book is organized. And as many of you know, on next Thursday, May 10th, we're having another reading in the Wanacue campus of the college. And I know some of you are coming to both readings, but I want to, again, welcome anybody who wants to come to both. That would be wonderful. And let me start out with Jim Wynn.
Good morning. Really nice to be here. Thank you all for putting this together. Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Maria. Welcome, Alpha. My poem is called What Do I Want? I'm not sure if we all turned out the way you wanted us to. You had 3 children. We're all grown up, out of the house, married, have our own kids. You said all that was okay at the time. Even when we were home, growing up, everything we did was okay. You said we were smart enough to make our own decisions about our lives, and we did. But now you're so critical about everything we do. Whatever happened to everything we did was okay. We're all getting up there in age, but you treat us like we were still kids. like we didn't grow up the way you now think we should have, instead of the way you let us. If you don't like what one of us does now, you change your phone number. How juvenile is that? So we all have to scramble to find a way to contact you. Our cousin is the only one who knows what you're doing. Why him? And when we get him on the phone, it's like an audience before the regent, and he'll give us the number if we pay proper obeisance, if we love, honor, and respect you. All that. Whoever said we didn't? When I left home, I met a lot of people who became my family, and none of them made me pledge allegiance for the mere idea that I owed it because of a title, mother. What's that? What do I want from you? Nothing. A phone number so I can call. What do I want from you? Nothing. To be your son.
Thank you. And next we have Naomi Kahan. This is my first time reading before anyone. I will always remember.
Naomi, honey, push that microphone
Down. Is that better? When I first met you, I was 19, young, naive, innocent. You were 26, on a blind date with my sister, returning home at the end of the evening for coffee and dessert. I glanced at you, and you became my dessert, the object of my desire. You in a pinstripe suit, looking so unlike other dates, looking like a man and not a boy, looking like the future. How could I help but flirt with you, throwing caution to the wind? I charmed you, I engaged you with behavior surprising even me. When you left, you whispered in my ear, I will call you. Promise, hope, joy filled me. Not the shame I should have felt at overshadowing my sister and her possible dreams. You are gone from me now. Only memories remain of that young girl and that handsome man who became my beloved, my partner, my life partner. Death has paid the last visit. I would flirt with you again, wrap my arms around you, hold you in an unending embrace if I only could. Your illness destroyed your mind. It kept you from knowing me. It became the permanent separator of our lives, even while we lived. Sometimes death comes before the final end. It came slowly, day by day. You slipped away by degrees, your body and your mind both vanishing. Then one day, as I held you in my arms, you took one last breath, and you were gone, leaving me with empty arms, leaving me with an empty life, leaving me with only the memory. Thank you. And next we have Marge Kellerman.
My poem is called Red Pencil. It's for Mary, my friend, my workshop classmate. Here she comes, red pencil in hand, menacing all in her path. Sharpened every morning, that darn red pencil. Sharpened to an almost lethal point, that darn red pencil. She wears it down with circles and slashes and underlines, filling in missing punctuation and correcting misspellings. Rearranging words more to her liking. I'm seeing red. Make red marks on my paper, as many as you like, but you can't rearrange the words in my head.
Thank you. And now, Carol Lane.
before either, but it was really fun to have the workshop and to have the different poets come. So I was inspired, actually by Laura for this one. She gave us some topics, and this one was called The Last Time. The last time I galloped through the trees on a sunlit morning, the leaves were already leaving their branch tethers, building a trail carpet where my horse's hooves were dancing over silt and stones, quivering with inhalations of crisp air, breathing a steamy stream from flared nostrils as I grabbed mane. We were flying over a log in perfect tandem. The last time I galloped through the trees, I remember that they were my sacred cathedral, my horse's sweat, my solace.
Thank you. And now we have Elizabeth Marchetti.
And I just had a recent discussion about the use of the word almost. It's mentioned twice in here. And I loved the workshops. They were fun. Thank you all. Seeking perfection. Well, I wasn't perfect at English. Almost. I wasn't perfect at Spanish. Almost. I was a total disaster at math. Of all kinds. And bookkeeping and I did not get along. I could sew. I used to sew a lot. I made beautiful dresses for me. I made even more beautiful dresses for my daughters. One time, my daughter Diane picked a pattern so difficult, I thought I couldn't do it. But I could. I did. My sewing machine and I, perfectionists. I remember I took the bus to downtown Patterson in those good old days of wonderful department stores like Meyer Brothers and Quackenbush's, and one fantastic store on Ellison Street, home of beautiful fabrics, patterns, buttons, threads, and such. I went in search of 4-inch zippers for the long fitted sleeves of that junior size 7 with the empire waist and the many-gored skirt. I found them. I finished the dress. I wonder what became of that blue silk perfection. Thank you.
Thank you. And Donna Spector.
You made a giant alphabetical jump. What my body told me. I threw up on Gerald Hawley in 4th grade because Mrs. Grape wouldn't let me go to the bathroom. But that wasn't as bad as the time I was 4, when my father took me to Don McNeil's radio show, and all of us kids had to laugh on stage at comics that weren't funny. So I threw up on Dagwood and Blondie. But that wasn't as bad as when I was 14. And I threw up in the bushes because my mother dragged me to a Hollywood audition where all the girls were blonde, blue-eyed, and could cry on cue. So I quit throwing up for years until 1988, when a Southern writer came to read his novel to me on my birthday, and I threw up on him and his opening pages. But that wasn't as bad as the time I threw up and passed out in bed, while my French lover watched but finally rescued me. And I threw up on the doctors and nurses in my clean white hospital room until they cut me open and took out whatever was making me throw up. All those words I could never say, the fears and tears, anger like a big red lump. And I knew I'd never have to throw up again.
Thank you. And Seema Tepper.
No metamorphosis. I cannot tell you how uncomfortable I felt dressed in the pink formal gown borrowed from Cousin Sheila. You fussed with my hair, loaned me pearl button earrings with a bracelet to match. Aunt Harriet, you had arranged a date for me with one of the Platt boys to attend a dance at the Broadmoor Country Club. Aunt Harriet, I was only 13. I loved visiting you. I loved Uncle Max. I even loved little Steffi when she bit my toes in the morning. You, so glamorous in your Cadillac convertible, top down, curly brown hair windblown, slender, a fur scarf at your throat, high heels clicking when we went to Ayers for lunch, the special open turkey sandwich with a dollop of caviar on top. How could I tell you the pink dress was too tight? I couldn't tell Melvin Platt I was 16. You greeted him at the door in your long blue silk dressing gown. He shoved a flower box at me. You said, "Oh, a gardenia. How so beautiful." You pinned it on my shoulder. It smelled awful. I didn't want to smile. My braces would show. I said, "Thank you." I wanted to say, "Please let me stay here. I'll sit on the plush sofa and read, eat dinner from the Fiesta-ware dishes, play checkers with Uncle Max, help you shape the chopped liver like a pineapple and decorate it with olives." You put your green jacket over my shoulders, kissed my cheek, and told me to have fun. Melvin Platt and I got into the elevator, emerged on the ground floor, went to the curb where Mr. Platt waited in his Lincoln. Oh, Aunt Harriet, I can joke now that you taught me to smile at any discomfort being beautiful might entail. I was 13. A girdle? Nylon stockings? Oh, Aunt Harriet, somehow you had always known when I needed a fuzzy pink sweater or a set of Honey Bunch books. What made you think I could become a glamour puss and mix with the rich kids? Whatever happened to Melvin Platt?
Thank you. Now, have any of the participants come in when I wasn't looking and I didn't, as everybody has read? If so, then I will read my poem. And as I said, I had not written poetry, but I was in Maria's workshop, and this is the result. My love, you were such a big man. At 6'6", you towered above us all, reminiscent of a patriarch with your gray beard, sonorous voice, and commanding manner. I think of you seated behind your massive desk of polished mahogany, an emblem of the authority you enjoyed. You loved to take care of me, and I loved it too. Your strength reassured me, and I felt so safe. You were still strong the evening of your death. You had insisted on coming home to die in your own bed, in your own home, all the while instructing me how to manage my life without you. You were brave. I was terrified. But 7 years have passed, and I'm in a different place from where I was that night when I needed you so desperately. Yes, I'm alone and often lonely. but no longer needy, and I feel disloyal. Oh, did I skip you? I'm so sorry. How did I do that? Well, I guess I did. Bob Rosenblum. I apologize.
I have a large print edition to read from. The poem is Lily Sunshine, and it's based on 2 prompts from the workshop that Laura Boss ran. And one of the prompts was the day I got married, the other prompt was the day I got my driver's license, so I sort of combined these two. It won't surprise you to learn I met my wife as the result of a funeral through the grieving widow who had just buried her 4th husband, Willie Sunshine, cousin to my great-uncle Lipa, First World War veteran on the side of the Russian army, probably White Russia, bloodstains on fresh snow, trudging through the outskirts of Moscow, Lipa with the residual scar just below his right eye where a bullet entered and exited, and Willie, loudmouth extraordinaire, court street lawyer, investigator, ambulance chaser, disbarred attorney, never finished law school, never passed the bar, whose pants would ride up around his beach ball-sized crotch, Willie from the 2-foot zippers, and Willie's wife, so utterly not beside herself, so not full of tears, whispered at his graveside, after my ceremonial full shovel of dirt, "Have your mother call me, I'll give her my grandniece's number." And my wife couldn't have been more furious, more enraged at her mother for being so compliant, for being a co-conspirator in this eventual marriage plot. Catalyst, provocateur, family traitor, Yenta. And we met on the corner of Cropsey Avenue and Bay 47th Street at the bus stop. I had my father's Olds 98. We both thought we looked okay, which was okay. We were both hard up and lonely. She liked me because I called her when I said I'd call. I didn't stand her up by the phone like the jerk she met at Scenes Farm. Now that you know how I met my wife, it won't surprise you to hear that the day I got my driver's license 9 years before, I road tested on Stillwell Avenue in Avenue Z in Brooklyn, wore white socks and dark pants and a white shirt. I trimmed my sideburns. I didn't want the road test guy to think I was even remotely a hippie. I passed with flying colors. I didn't hit the curb when I parallel parked. I didn't overturn at the corner sewer basins. He asked for a K-turn in the middle of West 15th Street, and I gave him the best one I had. And then at night with my father's car, I drove my friends down to Coney Island, where we went on bumper cars again and again, crashing into each other, laughing our heads off, banging into strangers, thugs and their inner girlfriends, honor students gone wild, ending up on the siphone, hands up in the air, eating apples.
I'm scheduled to speak on the 10th, but if you would like for me to
Absolutely. Absolutely. Come on up, especially since you were referred to. This is the lady with the red pencil, Mary Loudon. Yes, absolutely.
And what's your name?
Mary Loudon. And I'm going to read from my original because the print is small there for me to read. Because I wrote too much.
Oh, and since this poem actually was dedicated to Laura Voss, Laura asked me to mention to all of you that she would have loved to have been here, but she had a conflict, something at the Dodge Foundation. I'm not sure what it was, but she had to be doing something for the Dodge Foundation today. And she says hello to everybody whose workshops she led. And it was especially important for me to just mention this because of Mary's poem being dedicated to her.
Well, actually, that poem is a little bit emotional for me, so I think I'm going to read the other one.
Oh, okay.
I wrote two very sad poems. One of my dead fiance who died of an asthma attack when he was 20 years old, and this was the one Susan was referring to. and the other one was a little red-tailed hawk, which died on my farm. And both of them are emotional, and I'm not used to reading in public, and I'm not used to writing poetry. As Marge pointed out, I'm a copy editor with a red pencil, so I'll try my best. And if I start to cry, please forgive me. Little Red Tail. You fell from the highest nest in a tall oak tree beside the woodland path we hike on every day. No one knows how long you lay there, stoic, quiet, feigning invisibility, ruffled feathers blended with rotting leaves that might have cushioned your fall. Not one of our dogs noticed your gangly body, nor smelled the signs of stress at the base of the oak. My husband saw you sitting in the leaves one morning and carried you carefully to our country cottage. He called me to come and see what he had found. You sat erect, but tense and tired, in a small box on our deck. I cautiously filled the box with clean hay, careful not to touch you. Your fluffy head passed side to side, feathers ruffled, wary as your bright black eyes searched my timid face. At first, you seemed enraged. I thought you might attack. Your beak was large and curved, sharp and open. You had the heart of a raptor, fearless, fierce, and free. Ravenous little fledgling, you were determined to live. You grabbed those solid chunks of juicy beef with gusto. I chopped the meat until you had your fill, and I rejoiced. Your hearty appetite was a wonderful sign. You would live, you would grow, you would someday fly into the clouds. Not wanting to frighten you, I did not touch you. Your eyes watched me constantly. I fed you every hour. When you were full, I returned you to the nesting tree and left you there, propped inside a bowl of hay. Looking up at me, you peeped in vain for several lonely hours. I spied on you from time to time, hoping nature would take charge. But no mother came, no fledgling siblings cried, no hawk swooped down to claim her own. It broke my heart. I did not know the length of time that you and she had been apart. You were hungry again. You peeped. I took you home and placed you in your box. I did not touch you more. Again, your watchful eyes searched my face. Again, I fed you on the hour. A night, a day had passed. You ate upon each hour, your cries demanding, harsh and shrill. I took pride to think your hawkish brain had learned my face. I fed you chunks of beef and feared no more that you would plunge your beak into my palm. Your eyes met mine, and maybe insight passed from hawk to human and back again, or so I hoped. I yearned to understand your shrieks, your tiny peeps. I fell asleep that night, lost in impossible avian dreams of you and me together flying high above the Jersey hills. The second dawn, I rose and rushed to feed you in your covered box. Suddenly, I sensed that all was wrong. I found you weak and quiet, your peeps subdued. You barely lifted up your head. Your eyes no longer tried to meet my own. You begged and ate no more. And then, as suddenly as you had come to me, you passed away. I could not move nor breathe. I was in shock, as clearly you had been in your final tragic dying hours before that rosy dawn. Your dangling, gray, disheveled wings spread out between my hands. Your head fell back, your belly up, as tears streamed down my face. At long last, I examined you in depth, in death, and found the awful truth. Oh, tiny baby red-tailed hawk, your zest for life had known no bounds. Your instinct to survive was strong. You ate to live, though you were dead. I found the gaping hole within your chest, the pain that you concealed. From tallest tree, the longest, hardest fall, it took its toll. That fall, or some attack from land or air, had injured you, and multiplying maggots had sapped your waning strength. As you ate the beef with gusto from my hands and peeped for more, just the same, unknown to me, those wily worms were eating you. Long before we found you, before I tried to help, your fate was sealed. From me, your suffering was concealed. But your hawk mother knew. She surely knew and flew away and left you there beneath the tree to die. I cried. My best intentions only served to lengthen all your pain. I held your body in my hands and mourned for what I did not know and could not change. In life, you were in death. There was no saving you. I carried my lifeless baby into the early morning sun and placed it in its little box with hay. Hearing distant sounds, I looked upward at the sky, and below the clouds that scudded by, 2 hawks were slowly circling overhead above the deck. I heard their shrieking cries and saw their outstretched wings. I sat quite still and watched them soar until they finally flew away. Such a feeling of connection to all living things upon this earth then filled my heart, a peaceful sadness that I barely understood. I write this not to end my story well, but to tell the truth of what I saw. High up there within the clouds, 2 red-tailed hawks had said farewell. They flew to other dark green forests in these northern Jersey hills. In noonday sun, I took the hay-filled box and said goodbye and buried my courageous little bird beside the shimmering pond. And that was all I ever knew of you, my little red tail, mi gabilan.
Thank you. And is there anybody else that I skipped? This is so embarrassing because I'm so detail-oriented. Okay. And this has been such an honor. I know so many people have said to me that they were so pleased to be able to be involved in writing poetry and reading poetry, and especially in front of a renowned poet, Michael Weaver. That makes it even a bigger thrill. And do you want to take just a few-minute break, or do you want to move on? What do you think, Maria? Well, why don't we take a 5-minute break?
Yes. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.
I think we'll be back and comfortable and now ready for our next phase of the morning. It's just such a pleasure, such an honor to introduce Alpha Michael Weaver. He'll read some of his own poetry, of course, and maybe tell us a little bit about his background, which seems to be so fascinating to me. I'd like to hear myself. I'd like to hear a little more about it, so I assume you would too, because he's been a Pew Fellow of Poetry and taught in the National Taiwan University and Taipei National University of the Arts in Taiwan as a Fulbright Scholar. And he currently teaches at Simmons College. But I know I'm personally curious how you ended up in Taiwan. And I hope you will satisfy my curiosity and everybody else's also. So now please help me welcome Alpha Michael Weaver.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning. Good morning. I'll have to adjust this. Is that right? Okay. First of all, what a pleasure it was to sit there and listen to you read your work and sit there and think about how important poetry is to us when we're looking at our lives, and our lives sort of make sense at some point. Well, our lives make sense at various points, but as we get a little older, then it makes a little more sense. Right? I'm 60, I'll be 61 in November, and Maria said, "Oh, you're still a baby." Not to my son, he said, "You're an old man." Okay. How did I get to Taiwan? Well, last night I was watching Dr. No on my iPad. Remember Sean Connery? It was 1962 when that film came out. And it's a really, to look at it nowadays, it's kind of odd because they had a white actor playing a Chinese man and a woman who looked to be Eurasian playing a Chinese woman, and the black characters had this strange dialogue, but when I saw the film, I was 10, almost 11 years old. I thought it was the greatest thing I'd ever seen. And one of the things about it was, the Sean Connery film started to introduce martial arts into our urban communities, right? And so among working class kids, Kung Fu and karate became the thing. And that's sort of how I got started on China, and a couple of years later, someone gave me a copy of the Tao Te Ching. I was working in the factory. Worked in factories for 15 years because I was one of those dropouts from the 60s, And so it just kept building and accumulating. So I was in Boston taking Tai Chi up there. I had to switch to a new Tai Chi school, and I moved to Boston, as they say. And a really stiff place up there. And so my Tai Chi classmate used to teach English over there. He'd go back and forth teaching English on his own in private schools. And he said, "You should apply for Fulbright and go over there." And he kept after me. I said, "Okay, Joe, I'll do it. So I put it, and it came through. I said, look at that, it actually came through. So I ended up in Taiwan teaching at National Taiwan University, Taipei National University of the Arts. And when I came back, I started studying Chinese when I was 50 years old. But I think I'll start today, to answer your question, that's how I got to China. It was Dr. No. But I want to start off with a New Jersey poem. I think of New Jersey and I think of Maria Gillen. Maria's the president of New Jersey. I used to live in East Orange for a few years with my third wife, and I used to catch the bus. This is called Mass Transit. I caught the bus from Seton Hall when the law school when it was down by the train station before they built the new Seton Hall Law School. Mass Transit for Sonia Sanchez. She sat at the front near the driver, watched as new riders dropped their change and flash passes. She sat stoical and grim in a dress blue like the passive colors for a baby boy, or the blue of peace. Everyone jostled along with the creak and moan of the bus that strained to fit the contours of earth like a worm in a straitjacket. I peeked over the shoulder of the woman in front of me to read her Haitian newspaper. I caught the bold print in an ad for a get-rich scheme, Devenez riche maintenant. She read slowly and intently, while the rest of us ate silently for a quiet ride home. In all this intimacy, we were thrown together with strangers, grandmothers who returned from shopping where merchants devour the poor, young women who carried books home from college, the community college where they battled like Marines for their hope, and me with my briefcase and poetry as I rode back from the law school. All of us ate for a quiet ride home. The woman in blue erupted but did not change her face. With the same smile, almost a grimace, she said, "Better get ready for the judgment. My Lord is coming down." The bus rattled over a large pothole as we all shot up stiffly for a second and realized she was preaching. All this crack and stuff, the Lord don't like it. You're all guilty. Suddenly she became what I suspect she wanted to be, the angel sent in the last hour before the others come with their wrecking crew of pestilence, famine, and war. They turn a perfect summer day like this to burning blood and raised a lake of fire so that everyone can see. The serpent beat the surface with his infinite tail. Her blue became the blue of some fires that look cool from a distance, belie their ability to make the skin crackle and curl to ash. The driver picked up speed, hoped that each stop would be hers and her sermon would stop its march up and down like a rider who intimidates on the late-night buses where the angry old men ride. But she sat as if riveted to her seat. Slowly the passengers began to thank her as they got off, those riders who knew the hour of our condition. They touched her softly on the knee and whispered kindly to her, "God bless you, sister." She smiled and adjusted her grip on her Bible. We began to forget about her in Judgment Day. We bounced along, braced ourselves for the awkward crawl around the corners as we passed the deserted lots of Newark and headed into East Orange. There, men in disheveled clothes gathered near abandoned buildings. It seemed that doom had already come with its heralds and gone. Through it all, I thought of a friend's dispensation for those traveling the apocalypse. Only the poor ride the bus. You know, we have an African-American president, which is a little bit of an odd thing because he actually is African-American. His father's from Africa, his mom is from the U.S. And he's not entirely popular with African-Americans, as you can tell from Cornell West and Tavis Smiley. He's raised all kinds of dandruff, you know, but I think about history, and I'm trying to employ a little hip-hop in some of my poetry in subtle ways, you know. I don't like the misogyny, I don't like the violence, but the way they use language and recurring patterns in the line is really interesting. It makes you think about the stress of meter in poetry. But the other stuff needs to be worked on. But anyway, in terms of history, South Carolina was the richest state in the country just before the Civil War, right? And but it was a peculiar place because the Africans who worked the plantations were from Senegal, Sierra Leone, where they grow rice. And plantation owners preferred Africans from those areas because they didn't have to teach them anything. They came here and they knew exactly what to do. As a matter of fact, there's a culture that grew up around that area, the coast around Charleston, the Gullah, and they have the language, they retain the language, they even make the same baskets that they make in Sierra Leone. The weather was so bad that very often the plantation owners had to move upland, and malaria they couldn't handle it. But the Africans were used to that kind of humidity and moisture. So they would turn the plantations over to the African overseers, and they would move upland. And so in the history, there's this kind of cycle of leaving property and businesses to trusted black people to run. So I said, well, now they got a country. You know, so. A South Carolina state of nation mind, after Jay-Z, the hip-hop man. Mosquitoes drove whites upland to count money black overseers made. Mosquitoes made the air grow welts on skin, unused to what makes money. The sun boiling Charleston Harbor, boats chugging through the marsh with rice. Mosquitoes, not blacks in their congresses of prayer, disease like the riots in the land. The Second Civil War, when Brown decisions set free Middle Passage ghosts, free so blacks could own corners, drive whites to the hills, suburbs choking with Nigerian petroleum. Back to Africa again for investment capital, triangles of oil, dope, experimental drugs. Mosquitoes drove whites upland to count votes when the cities turned black and black mayors won the empty space of abandoned plantations. Mosquitoes, insects, with some grand connection to God, wings pulled apart by children who voted the first black man to oversee a country tearing its own guts apart to escape history. And I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and Baltimore wanted to be in the Confederacy, so it was an embarrassment to the Union, so they had to send troops into Baltimore. And Federal Hill, there's a cannon overlooking the harbor, that the troops threatened the city. You know, you cannot go into the Confederacy because you're north of the Union capital. It would be embarrassing to have a Confederate city above Washington. So quite a few people in the Baltimore city government were put in prison. And the prison that they used at the time was Fort McHenry, where the national anthem was written. So all these ironies and just peculiar things about Baltimore. And Baltimore is a place where the first military casualties of the war took place. I moved to Boston, they said, oh, there's the Babe Ruth curse from Boston. The Red Sox will never win the World Series, right? Babe Ruth was from Baltimore, right? But the first casualties of the Civil War were when the Massachusetts 6th Regiment came through the city. And they were a group of musicians, young boys. They had instruments, and they had to walk from one train stop to another. And when they walked through the city, people from Baltimore came out of their houses with pickaxes and clubs and killed about 6 of the boys. Baltimore, my hometown. And this is for Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln leans over the balcony. Ford's Theater, Washington, D.C., April 14, 1865. In the moment magic happens on the stage, it is the broad explosion of a coquette's smile, the tiny part of a second it takes to remember Springfield. And I forget how far it is to the ground or to the stage, or how tall I seem to myself when I am sitting here rocking, some broad loom weaving away our endings, and how deep the hushing wish of this melodrama, the way it winds itself out of an actor's memory, skips over the real acts of a life, mixes with them to make this fiction, a tapestry of white lies I see, now lowering my head softly to my lap, in the smoke of powder from a pistol, no sweetness now, no lifting gaze from a parasol, only the sweep of this curtain, 1,000 final ways, now one. And so I went to Taiwan the first time, and my Chinese was barely existent, right? And so I'd get in a taxi cab, and I would tell the taxi driver to take me to the gate of the university. And so, you know, the word for university is Da Shui. You know, Da goes down, Shui comes up. But I would say Da Shui, which means hit the blood and kill all the people in the village. So I came back and started studying Chinese. If you don't get those tones right, you get in a lot of trouble. There's some words you use in Taiwan you definitely don't use in mainland because you'll get in trouble. But this was about when I moved to Taiwan a few years later for 8 months on sabbatical to study Chinese. Theme for intermediate Chinese. After Langston Hughes' theme for English P. Teacher recites and I follow, copying her words, taping the class so I can listen at home. Make sentences, she says, one for every word, and I count them in Chinese, building the tones from memories. A child of the 50s, it is the time of my 50s when I rub my hair and touch only the wrinkly skin that has forgotten hair. I count days as gifts now, homework is a gift, and this small, flat 12,000 miles away on the other side of forgetting and remembering. I take the MRT subway to my neighborhood, walk past the lady who was not so nice, to the faces that warm and brighten when I pass, through the park of children, slides, swings, and old women under the trees, across the tiles of the walkway to my building to press my security key to the elevator, kiss it softly to say, it's me again, as if the key doesn't know the only black man in the neighborhood. War is the word for I, and it sounds like woe's sadness, or woe, the sound to stop the whirring of things. I practice it, writing over and over, rolling on the sound of the elevated train going by, where everyone knows I is me. I meditate on the congregation of genes and wishes that brought me here. Counting back the 4 generations to the first African, naming along the way the Native Americans, Europeans, a polka dot army of chromosomes and molecules like tiny spaceships that align themselves with mystic glue, so that I am the same mystery each day and do not dissolve into a glob in the midst of Taipei's rush to go and buy things, as I recite alone to myself the Chinese for going and buying. What have I bought in this place where only the inside can matter, and the outside is so many things to so many, and who are we? The Chinese sentence for this takes me all night into the slide of constellations over night markets and the human clinging of music to silence. We are genes, we are the art of the mind of some great emptiness above, or here below, inside the bulb of a beat, things that grow underground and thrive on darkness, the humble fullness of light. Now, the characters here on the side of this book, this is the Plum Flower Dance. It's a reader, 20-year overview of my poems. And it's May, Wu, and May is a word for plum. Wu is part of the word for dance, Tiao Wu. So in Chinese, when we're discussing a character, we say, and so you talk to, well, which Wu is this? This is the Tao Wu. And so in Taiwan, a poet friend of mine said, Afra, I need to tell you something. And I said, okay, what is? He said, listen to me. That means oversexed. I said, okay. Maybe that'll work too, you know. I'll try to figure that into the next book to make it make sense here. But I was staying in a monastery in Taiwan and working on this new book of mine that's coming out sometime, well, early next year. And part of the process of maturing as an adult for me, I don't know if I'll ever be really mature, but having come to terms with the fact of having been abused as a child and having a disastrous history of relationships. So I was in this monastery in Taiwan because a friend asked me to come and teach Tai Chi to the nuns, all right? And they were really mischievous nuns. One of them kicked me. I said, look, you're a Buddhist nun, you're not kicking me. But that's where I started working on this manuscript. It was the spring of 2005. And Henan sits on the east coast of Taiwan, right on the Pacific Ocean. You can walk down about 150 yards from the gate of the monastery into the ocean. And there's this huge statue of Guanyin, the goddess of compassion, sitting on the top of the hill. So I would go up and sit up there next to Guanyin and bemoan my station in life, you know. But these bamboos grow. Bamboo is a weed. It grows like that. And they're all around the side of the hill there. So I wrote this poem called Leaves. The lines that make you are infinite, but I count them every day to hear the stories you carry. These are not secrets but records, things we should know but ignore. If I commit the sin of tearing you from the tree, I find another world inside the torn vein, another lifetime of counting the records of who walked here before, of what lovers lay here holding each other through wars and starvation. Some days I stand here until I lose focus and travel, drifting off out of the moment, too full of it, and my legs are now like trees, mindless but vigilant, held into the earth by the rules of debt, what we owe to nature for trying to tear ourselves away. I drift and the pleasure of touch comes again, layers of green in the mountainside, a tickling in my palms. The pleasure is that of being lost here in the crowd of trunks and pulp, the ground thick with the death of you, sinking under my feet as I go, touching one and another, linking myself through until the place where I entered is gone. When I am afraid, My breath is caught in my throat. When I am not afraid, I lift both hands up under a bunch of you to find the way the world felt on the first day. A love poem, The Link. On a bench, two lovers kiss at lunchtime and longer, long after we are back in the office, peeping out the windows at them, wondering what jobs they have. And one of us pokes the other to make us laugh, and some of us laugh while others climb back into working, picking through computers and papers while we wish for home with whatever is there. Loneliness, or the house crammed with voices, or the confusion of all those things together, while somewhere in the bound tongue of things we cannot say or know, there is the world of who we are. Each little thing we do together, the nod that makes the frown, the sigh that turns curious, the stretch that reveals a body and makes lust curl in the eye, the thought of food when someone warms a snack in the microwave, all this in some tapestry that connects us through the disconnects in some master plan of the way life works, like the two tongues twisting on the bench outside our windows, locking onto each other as if to sign a treaty with paradise in the end of time, where no one need wonder why anything ever happens. PMS. My third ex-wife and I used to argue about whether or not it was a male construction. PMS. We walk on a path of knives to the stone that is your foundation. It is in a swamp where your fears hang like moss, snakes slide through tears that have lain there gathering. The rains come every month with thunder that makes your head rattle and break open. It is then that we enter. I hold a light and take your hand in mine. Each step is like both giving up and trying again. Each step opens wounds that bleed in streams of bats squeaking out of us. At the stone there is an inscription in the hand of a woman now long gone. Off the knives, we take the wooden walkway to see the stone. It turns to fire, the words blazing like faces. I have to pull you closer. Only you understand the words here under the cry of predatory birds where the air is humid with blood. The sky flips yellow and then rumbles into black. I tell you our time is nearly gone, and you cry on your knees. At last I do what I am always forced to do. I pick you up and throw you into the water. You explode into a giant flower with purple petals and gold stems. You are you again. The swamp dries to a spring forest where the stone is a fountain. Our feet forget the knives in your heart. Now in New Jersey, I lived here. I also taught at Rutgers, and I've taught at the Southern Campus in Camden. And that's where I got tenure. And if you know anything about Rutgers, it's hard to get tenure at Rutgers. It's a large research university. So I worked very hard. And I got early tenure, and I got a heart condition. So I got the word about my tenure in April, and the third week in June, last week in June, I was in hospital at University of Pennsylvania, Hupp in Philly, in the cardiac unit with congestive failure. And my left ventricle had just sort of given out. And, there was no surgery to be done. This was all a matter of getting my life together. And so I'm much better now, but they wanted to give me another heart. And I said, I don't like that option. A poet has to just go with what he got, And so I chose not to do that. I did other things and actually recovered quite well. But I watched the film All That Jazz, open heart surgery. I don't like this, That was just your own heart, never mind the fact that take it out and put this other, and you're actually on this machine for quite a while. But this is a love poem for the lady that I was going with when I left Philly, I left New Jersey and moved to Boston. My heart. If ever they trace the lines of my chest with ink, as you trace them with your tongue, kiss me first. Hold my tongue to yours, pull it until it goes numb, paste your lips to mine until I can taste your birth. If ever they open me and the bluebirds come rushing out, I want to hear you sing in the flutter of wings. This is the way things are healed. This is how the tired travelers gaze into the eye to be sustained. And when the blood goes rushing away from me like children who have opened a forbidden spout, touch something of mine. Hold me that way to know that I want to hold you more than life itself, but a choice must be made. Some vinegar must go where agony cries out already enough. I hang in the tiny crochet and feeble hands as they give me a stranger's heart. If all of this is just a dream, and you fly away from me before the gray takes over, I will touch you everywhere I go. I will declare the world your body and christen our children in the air of name.